The card had changed everything, and yet on the surface, nothing at all. Officer Bryant still stood stiffly, jaw clenched, one thumb hooked around the top of his utility belt, like he needed it to anchor him. Officer Chen looked down at Earl's Marine Corps ID again, his expression caught between disbelief and discomfort. And Officer Walker, she hadn't said a word in minutes, just stared eyes dark, with something that was slowly tipping from protocol to shame. Earl Jennings, however, had not moved. He sat exactly as he had when they first approached, spine-straight, hands on his knees. His body spoke of stillness, but his silence now held an edge, a coldness that hadn't been there before. Around them, the park wasn't quiet anymore. The teen boys who'd been playing basketball stood by the curb, their game long forgotten. One of them, Jalen, was gripping the ball tightly in both hands, the way a kid might hold on to something when he's not sure what else to do. A couple walking a dog had stopped across the path. A jogger had slowed to a walk, earbuds dangling from her neck, mouth slightly open. Phones were out now. It was Officer Chen who noticed it first. His eyes flicked to the left, then right. "They're recording," he murmured under his breath. Bryant glanced up, his jaw locked. "Let them." But Earl was already watching them, those camera lenses, those watchful eyes, the way the park's soft quiet had morphed into something brittle and electric. He could feel it crawling across his skin, not fear, but the deep ache of being seen only when it was too late to matter. Walker finally stepped forward. "Sir, we didn't know who you were." Earl's voice was still low, still calm, but it no longer felt soft. "You didn't want to know." Walker flinched. "That's not fair." "No," Earl said. "It's not. And yet, here we are." From behind them, the sound of boots against pavement broke the moment. A fourth officer approached Officer Matthews, leading a German Shepherd on a tight leash. The dog was alert, ears, perked body, coiled with training. His paws made soft, purposeful contact with the stone path. Matthews looked up at the gathering crowd and then at his fellow officers, confused. "What's going on?" he asked. Bryant didn't answer. He didn't need to. The tension hung thick, and the look in Earl's eyes was enough to explain everything. But Max the dog had already stopped. His ears tilted forward, nose-twitching eyes locked on Earl. Then, without warning, Max pulled. The leash snapped taut. Matthews jerked forward in surprise. "Max, heel!" But the dog didn't listen. He lunged, not aggressively, not with threat, but with purpose. He ran straight to Earl. Gasps echoed from the crowd. Phones lifted higher. Officer Walker's hand twitched near her belt, but Earl didn't move. Max skidded to a stop in front of him, lowered his body slowly to the ground, and then almost reverently placed his head on Earl's lap. A stillness fell so sudden it rang. Earl's breath caught in his throat. He looked down, fingers trembling, and reached for the dog's ears. "Hey there," he whispered, voice hitching. "Still watching my six, huh?" The German Shepherd whimpered softly, tail sweeping once, twice against the ground. Clarence had once told him that dogs didn't remember the way humans did. They remembered in scent, in tone, and rhythm. But this wasn't just instinct. This was recognition. Max wasn't reacting to a command. He was remembering something deep, old, and loyal. Matthews stood frozen a few feet away, leash dangling from his hand like a forgotten tool. "He's never done that before," he said quietly. "Not with anyone." Earl didn't look up. He scratched behind Max's ear and said almost to himself, "You saved me once, boy. Looks like you're still at it." From the crowd, someone whispered, "Did he train that dog?" Another voice followed, "No way, these dogs never forget." Officer Bryant stepped forward, voice hard with confusion. "Matthews, regain control of your unit." Matthews hesitated. Then slowly he shook his head. "With all due respect, sir, I don't think I outranked this moment." The words rippled through the crowd like a struck chord. Bryant's jaw tensed. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means," Matthews said, stepping beside Earl, "that something's happening here that doesn't belong in a report. That dog just broke protocol for a man he hasn't seen in over 30 years. Maybe the problem isn't with the dog." Walker swallowed, her voice barely audible. "Maybe the problem is us." And then, without ceremony, the crowd began to shift. A man in a red baseball cap stepped closer. "Hey, did he say Kei-san?" he asked, eyes wide. That was one of the bloodiest battles in Nam, another said. I remember reading about it in school. One by one, murmurs turned to statements. The children who had clung to their parents now stepped forward curious. The basketball players lowered their phones and watched with wide eyes. An elderly woman leaned on her walker, eyes damp, nodding slowly. Officer Walker looked at Earl. The silence now stretched too thin for comfort. Sir, did you really serve with him? She asked, nodding at Max. Earl nodded. He's not the same dog, but he's of the same bloodline. I trained his handler. These dogs, they don't just follow orders, they follow souls. Matthews looked at Max with something like reverence. He chose him. Earl met Bryant's eyes for the first time since the confrontation began. You asked for ID, but I gave you something better. I gave you the truth. And still, it wasn't enough. Bryant looked down at his boots. We didn't mean any disrespect, but you gave it anyway. The weight of those words didn't just hang, they dropped like anchors into the chest of every listener. For years, Earl had sat on that bench unnoticed, and now in one charged moment, he had become impossible to ignore. The old Marine's hands still rested lightly on his knees, one of them now gently curled atop the dog's head. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry. But something in his posture had shifted like a tree that's weathered enough storms to know which way to lean. And just as the sun slipped low through the branches overhead, casting long golden streaks across the grass, Earl spoke once more. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. You want to protect this park, he said. Then learn who walks in it. Learn their names. Learn their weight. The voice that broke the silence was gravel deep and unmistakably sure. Jennings Earl turned slowly, lifting his chin, just enough to see the man stepping through the crowd. Tall black shoulders, squared with the quiet pride of someone who'd worn a uniform most of his life. A navy blue cap rested on his head embroidered with fading gold thread. Vietnam veteran, 1st Cavalry Division. His gait carried both age and memory steady despite the limp. The cane in his left hand barely touched the ground. Earl's breath caught in his throat. Clarence, he said softly. Clarence Bishop stopped 3 feet from the bench, eyes wet, a low whistle escaping his lips. Lord have mercy. I thought that was you. There was no ceremony in their meeting, just gravity, like 2 stars finally aligning after orbiting the same sky for decades. Clarence didn't offer a handshake. He stepped in and placed a steady hand on Earl's shoulder, like a man walking into a chapel. The hush over the crowd deepened. You're the one who dragged me out of that crater in '68, Clarence said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You carried me 2 miles through mortar fire. You kept me awake when I wanted to let go. You don't remember. I remember every inch, Earl said, voice cracking. I never forgot. The impact of Clarence's words settled over the crowd like a thunderclap without sound. A few people in the back gasped. Someone whispered, That's real history standing right there. A boy lowered his phone, eyes wide, mouth closed. Clarence turned toward the officers. You see this man here? He asked, voice gaining strength. He saved lives when most of us were just trying to survive. You think sitting on a bench makes him dangerous? You think this is who you enforce your rules on? Officer Bryant opened his mouth to speak, but Clarence raised a hand, not with aggression, but with authority earned in blood and battlefield dust. No, don't explain. Just listen. Walker's eyes brimmed with tears. Officer Chen stood rigid, his radio still crackling softly untouched. Officer Matthews didn't look away from Max, who now lay fully relaxed at Earl's feet, his tail making soft, slow arcs against the ground. Clarence turned back to the growing crowd. How many of you walked past this man and assumed he was nobody? How many of you would even recognize a real hero if he sat 3 feet from you? The murmurs stopped. The park fell silent again. Not the hush of tension, but of reverence. From the far end of the sidewalk, a voice called out gently, "Thank you for your service." Another followed. "We're sorry." A teenage boy in a red hoodie, Jalen, stepped forward, clutching his basketball. He didn't look at the officers. He looked only at Earl. "I didn't say anything earlier," he said, his voice trembling. "I just stood there." "I'm sorry," Earl smiled faintly, the lines in his face deepening. "You said plenty by staying, but next time step forward." Jalen nodded, shoulders lifting as if the weight of silence had finally rolled off. Behind him, a woman approached with a little girl clinging to her side. She knelt next to the child and whispered something in her ear. The girl stared at Earl, then at Mac's curiosity written all over her young face. "I told her not to stare," the woman said softly, but maybe she needed to. Earl leaned forward slightly, meeting the child's eyes. "It's okay to look," he said gently. "That's how we learn not to look away." The little girl stepped forward, offered her hand to Max, and the old dog pressed his nose against her fingers with gentle trust. She giggled just once, and in that single sound the heavy day seemed to lift. Bryant's voice broke through at last, quieter now, unsteady. "I was wrong." All eyes turned to him. "I saw a man on a bench and decided he didn't belong," Bryant said. "I forgot. People have stories." Earl didn't gloat. He didn't rise. He nodded slowly, voice even. "We all forget. The important thing is whether we choose to remember." Bryant stepped closer. "What can I do to make this right?" Earl thought for a moment. Then he said, "Next time you see someone alone, don't ask how long they've been there. Ask why they're there. And listen. Really listen." Silence again. But now it was the kind that held promise. From the back of the crowd, a man called out, "Someone should write this down." No another replied. "Someone should teach it." A ripple of soft laughter passed through the park, not the laughter of dismissal, but of relief, of awakening. Matthew, still kneeling by Max, looked up at Earl and whispered, "He remembered you after all these years." Earl looked down at Max. The dog thumped his tail twice, as if confirming. "He didn't remember me," Earl said. "He remembered what mattered." Clarence smiled beside him. "And now, so do they." The park was no longer a stage for confrontation. It had become something sacred. There were no podiums, no flags waving, no brass bands playing patriotic songs. But there was clarity and presence, and the unmistakable weight of truth being spoken aloud at last. One by one, people lowered their phones. Some knelt. Some just stood quietly, hands over hearts or clutched together. It wasn't orchestrated. It was simply right. The sun cast long shadows across the grass, the kind that stretch but don't linger. And in that light, Earl Jennings sat straighter than he had in years. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't misunderstood. He wasn't an old man on a bench. He was a story that had finally been heard. Morning came gently to Greenwood Springs Park. The sun, slow and golden, filtered through the canopy of oaks, painting the dew-covered grass with streaks of soft light. The city hadn't fully woken yet. There were no horns blaring, no joggers panting past with earbuds in, just birdsong, the occasional crunch of gravel under careful steps, and the sound of a leash softly jingling. Clarence Bishop arrived first. He moved slow but sure, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee, one black one, with just a touch of cream. Max the German Shepherd trotted beside him, tail swinging, already knowing the way. When they reached the bench, Earl was already there. Same spot, same posture, but something had shifted. It wasn't in Earl's stance or his voice, but in the space around him. Where once people passed by without a glance, now they came with quiet intent. Not to gawk, not to interrupt, just to witness. Word had spread. An older couple from 2 blocks down came and nodded, taking a seat on a nearby bench. A high school teacher from Lincoln High brought her civics class and said nothing, just asked her students to sit and listen. A teenage girl placed a folded sketchbook on the edge of the bench, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a charcoal drawing of Earl and Max, the lines delicate but certain, capturing something wordless between the man and the dog. There were no speeches, no ribbons being cut, but the community had returned not out of obligation, but out of something deeper. They had come to remember. On the tree behind Earl's bench, someone had tied a single ribbon gold, not to mark tragedy, but resilience. Tucked into the bark just beneath it was a small brass plaque, newly installed, bearing only 12 words. "To those who served quietly, we see you now." Earl hadn't asked for it. No one had told him it was coming, but someone had known it mattered, and that was enough. Officer Walker came in plain clothes, no badge, no belt, just a small leather-bound notebook tucked beneath her arm. She sat 2 benches away and stayed the entire afternoon. Officer Chen showed up next, this time in jeans and a hoodie. He didn't approach, just stood beneath a tree watching. He looked younger without the uniform, more human. He held his radio in one hand but never turned it on. Even Bryant came. He stood at a distance for a long time before making his way over. When he reached Earl, he didn't speak right away. Instead, he ran his hand over the smooth wood of the bench just once, then nodded. "I was wrong," he said. Earl looked at him, then back out toward the field where kids now played. "You weren't the first." "I don't want to be the last," Bryant replied. Earl didn't answer right away. Then he offered a soft response. "Then teach someone else what you learned here." Bryant nodded again and walked away slower than he came. The little girl from the day before returned with her mother. She approached cautiously, a yellow flower clutched in her small hand. "I brought this," she said, holding it out. Earl took it, gently placing it beside the sketchbook. "You remembered," he said. The girl smiled. Max did too. Max, as if on cue, lifted his head and rested it against Earl's leg. The old Marine scratched behind his ears. "Still watching my six." Later that day, a group of teenagers arrived, Jalen among them. They didn't say much. They sat in a circle near the bench, passing a water bottle like communion. They stayed for over an hour. Some of them took off their shoes and lay in the grass. Others simply looked out at the trees. It wasn't about the moment anymore. It was about what the moment had opened. A Vietnam-era veteran arrived just before noon. His dress cap was crisp, his steps labored. He stood in front of Earl, gave a slow, formal salute, and then without a word sat down in the grass. He didn't need to speak. His presence was enough. Clarence leaned toward Earl, voice low. "This may not be Washington, but it sure feels like a memorial." Earl nodded, "A living one." The city didn't issue a proclamation. There were no headlines in the local paper. But every afternoon for the rest of the week, someone came. To sit, to listen, to leave something, be it a note, a flower, or just a pause in their day. Evenings brought soft chatter and soft light. Children played while parents rested nearby. And always the bench stood steady beneath the oaks, with Max curled at its base and Earl sitting tall beside him. Some days he spoke. Other days he simply looked on. On Friday afternoon, Jalen came back alone. He approached slowly, pulling a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. It was a drawing this time of Earl in uniform, one hand resting on Max's head, the other raised in salute. Not toward a flag. Toward a group of people drawn in loose, gentle lines, neighbors, officers, teens, children. Earl took it with care, smiled. "Guess I'm famous now." Jalen shrugged, but his eyes gleamed. "You were always something. We just didn't notice." The two sat in silence a while. Clarence joined them later, humming an old hymn under his breath. "They see you now," he said. "They see all of us," Earl replied. The wind stirred the leaves above. Max sat upright for a moment, alert, then lowered his head and sighed like a soldier at ease. And Earl leaned back, not from pain, not from weariness, but from peace. For the first time in years, he didn't scan the park's edges, didn't brace for suspicion. He didn't feel like he had to explain who he was or what he'd done. Not here, not anymore. In that quiet corner of Greenwood Springs, something had shifted. He hadn't asked for recognition, but he'd been remembered. He hadn't demanded respect, but he'd received belonging. And as the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting soft gold across the field, the sounds of the park settled into something gentle, a whispering hush of wind and memory. Max curled tighter beneath the bench. Earl closed his eyes, not from exhaustion, but from rest. He had been seen, and that was enough. The breeze coming off the river was soft that afternoon, carrying with it the faint scent of cut grass and distant fried food from a vendor 2 blocks over. It was the kind of spring day that reminded you how warmth can sneak back into a place that's known too many cold seasons. On the far edge of Franklin Memorial Park, beneath a pair of broad oak trees, Earl Jennings sat in silence, just as he had every day for years. He always chose the same bench. Its green paint had long since flaked away, revealing the wood beneath dry, cracked and faded by time. The slats creaked when he sat like the groan of old bones remembering better days. Earl didn't mind. He preferred that bench to the couch in his apartment. He said less from it, but felt more. The trees behind gave just enough cover to blot out the traffic sounds from Monroe Street, and when the wind hit just right, he could almost forget he was in the city at all. Earl Jennings was 79 years old, retired Marine Staff Sergeant, 2 tours in Vietnam, 1 in the Gulf. His jacket, a faded olive green field coat from his younger years, still bore the outline of a USMC patch, worn soft from wear and memory. He zipped it up halfway, more out of habit than for the breeze. The collar was turned up, framing a pair of dark, steady eyes that had learned long ago how to scan a scene and leave no angle unchecked. He didn't come to the park for anyone but himself. His apartment was small, a one-bedroom near the overpass where sirens ran louder than thoughts. The park was his sanctuary. He came for quiet, for routine, and in a way for the ghosts who still followed him through the corners of his mind. He didn't talk much about the war. He didn't need to. The scars were never the loud kind. They showed in the way he sat, how he listened more than he spoke, and how he always kept his hands resting lightly on his knees, never clenched. To most people passing by, he was just another old man on a bench. The joggers didn't glance his way. Dog walkers gave a wide berth. Teenagers laughed too loudly in clumps and never noticed him at all. Every so often, a stroller-pushing parent would veer just a bit to the side, as if proximity to an old man in military boots might make their child uncomfortable. Earl noticed it all. He didn't flinch anymore. That had stopped bothering him years ago. Then the basketball rolled to his feet. He looked down, then slowly up. A gangly teenage boy, maybe 15, maybe a bit older, stood a few yards away, bouncing on his heels. He wore a red hoodie and sneakers so clean they looked new. His voice cracked a little as he called out, "Hey, sir, can you toss it back?" Earl bent forward, his fingers slow but sure, picking up the ball. The leather felt firm in his hands, familiar in a strange way. He held it a beat longer than necessary, then pulled his arm back and delivered a clean, arching spiral. The boy caught it with a grin. "Thanks," Earl gave a small nod. That was it. The moment passed like a breeze. The boy ran back to his friends, the game resumed, and Earl leaned back once more, feeling the sun across his shoulders. Yet something in his chest stirred, not from the boy's gratitude, but from the simple act of being acknowledged. As the shadows of the trees stretched further across the grass, Earl let his eyes close for just a moment. The air was warm, and the scent of honeysuckle carried on the wind. In the hum of distant voices and the faint thump of basketballs on asphalt, there was music, old quiet music that only men like him still heard. He thought of Georgia summers of long-ago barracks, laughter of the sound helicopters made when they dipped low over tree lines. He didn't expect anything else that day. He never did. He didn't come for conversation or charity or recognition. He came because he needed to sit where the world still let him exist, in stillness, in peace. That's when they appeared. 3 uniformed officers walking side by side up the path with a kind of deliberate motion that made it clear they weren't on patrol. They were heading somewhere. Their boots clicked in rhythm against the stone path. Their belts were tight, radios crackling softly at their hips. Earl opened his eyes and straightened slightly. He didn't startle, but he did take measure. The tallest one, Officer Bryant, was in front, his gaze fixed on Earl with practiced authority. "Evening, sir," he said, his voice dry. "You've been here for a while." Earl nodded once. "Just enjoying the sun. You got any ID on you?" Earl's eyes held steady. "Not on me." Bryant didn't shift. The second officer, Chen Young, clean-shaven, more cautious, looked around the park as if trying to gauge how visible they were. "We've had a few calls," he said. "People feel uneasy when folks linger too long." Earl's brow creased slightly. "Uneasy," he repeated. "Sitting quietly is now a threat." Neither officer responded. The third walker, a woman with her hair pulled tight beneath her cap, stood just behind them. Her hand didn't touch her holster, but it hovered. Earl saw it. A Marine always noticed hands. Bryant's tone sharpened. "This isn't a shelter. If you're not waiting for someone or heading somewhere, you need to move along." Earl exhaled. "I've sat on this bench nearly every day for years. Never caused harm, never left trash, never asked for anything." Walker hesitated. Her voice was softer. "Maybe he's just resting." Bryant shot her a look. Resting turns into loitering. We all know how that plays out. Earl looked down at his palms, creased, calloused, steady. Hands that had written names on helmets, steadied brothers through firefights, held rifles with deadly precision. Now those hands were being judged for resting too long on a bench. "You want to see a threat, officer?" Earl asked quietly. "You'll have to look elsewhere." "I'm fresh out." For a moment, silence held. A jogger slowed. A stroller stopped. From the court, a few teenagers paused mid-dribble. Something was happening. The air changed. Officer Chen shifted. "It's nothing personal, sir." Earl gave a bitter smile. "It never is, until it is." The breeze picked up, rustling the branches above them. Walker looked at Earl longer than she meant to, and something in her expression cracked. Not fear, not defiance. Recognition just beginning to form. Bryant stepped forward. "We'll need to identify you right now." Earl sighed. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket. His fingers found the worn leather of his wallet. He pulled it out and handed it to Bryant with the care of a man passing a flag. Bryant flipped it open, impatience in his grip. He shuffled through, then paused. A laminated card, a faded photo, a title. United States Marine Corps Staff Sergeant Earl Jennings. Retired. Walker leaned in. Chen's brows furrowed. "This is real," he said softly. Earl said nothing. He didn't need to. The truth had weight, and it was starting to settle.